I'll just start with giving you a little bit of my story in relation to viral hepatitis, most specifically hepatitis C, but I also lived with hepatitis B for a while in my very early 20s. I'm 62, so the journey was quite a long one from when I actually became Hep C positive in the early 80s through intravenous drug use. There were a lot of us who became positive, but we had no idea because it wasn't classified as a separate hepatitis from non-A, non-B. So there wasn't a lot of investigation of it for a long time. And I think the world started to see the impact of it. So there was more research done about it. So as Dr. Kamal, is that correct? What? And I'm sorry, I'm not good with remembering names, but you were talking about facilities and how they impact people becoming Hep C positive or Hep B positive. Facilities make a huge difference. NSP make a huge difference. The non-judgmental approach to those who use intravenous drugs is immeasurable. It's a sense, and you've already touched, a couple of your speakers have already touched on the aspect of stigma, which unfortunately is something that a lot of people, especially in the past, live with, and discrimination. It's becoming less prevalent, far less prevalent, but I still feel there's a long way to go. And organisations like Liverwell, all the relevant agencies, services throughout Australia in relation to specifically viral hepatitis have been groundbreaking in their approach, and so has Australia in general in supporting and promoting harm reduction. Anyhow, I've sort of got off track. I just wanted to say thank you to the previous speaker, directly addressing the harm reduction, how powerful that is. So I lived with hepatitis C. It didn't really impact me. I lived in a big city for 17 years and I worked full-time, a pretty stressful job. I used intravenously to up until my mid-50s, and began to, because of needle and syringe programs, and as you were referring to, chemists who were really on board, no cost provision of syringes and relevant equipment. That's a great initiative because you always used to, for years, you had to buy them. And that was a really big issue for a lot of people who only had enough money to actually buy their drugs. Sorry if that's a bit full on to say that, but it's a reality. And so until my mid-40s, I was reasonably healthy. And then the intensity of my workload and my mental health really started to impact. I sort of stopped working consistently in about 2010, and I was diagnosed with bipolar at the same year. And I'd always recognised I was living with mental illness, but I didn't know which specific diagnosis until like I said, 2010. And so around this time, I was looking at being proactive in relation to hepatitis, living with hepatitis C. I had utilised Chinese herbs, milk thistle. There was a lot of complementary, there was a lot of availability of alternatives to interferon that were promoted as a means, as a stopgap until you could get onto treatment, or you decided you were sick enough to get onto treatment. Because I'm really sorry, once again, I can't recall his name. The doctor previously was talking about the side effects of interferon, and they were horrific for some people, less so for others, but increased a lot of lethargy, in a lot of cases, significant changes in mental health. A lot of responses were around wanting to suicide. So major impact, quite apart from how toxic it was for your body. So I thought I was starting to progress into feeling really sick. For me and for a lot of others, the impact of side effect from living with Hep C of brain fog, which is hard to describe, but your clarity, your ability, your cognitive abilities are really impacted. Well, mine were, and a lot of other people. So I was not in a good place for many, many years in relation to my mental health. And so accessing services was difficult for me, because to actually get from A to B was challenging. And I missed appointments, and then I would engage, and then I would not engage. I was on an opioid replacement program, and there are a whole lot of variables thrown into the mix of my life. And then I attempted, there was a really great clinic at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in that's Sydney. I was living in Sydney, and I went to access treatment. And like Hepatitis New South Wales, there were a lot of really progressive and supportive services that were non-judgmental. So you could go in there, they'd look after you, which is what the services the two previous doctors were talking about, is giving a space where people can go in and talk about living with hepatitis, viral hepatitis, specifically Hep C, in a safe environment. I think safety in relation to health provision is paramount in relation especially to living with Hep C, given that for a lot of people living with it, it's been they've become positive via intravenous drug use. So that's another whole issue. So I'm jumping around here, but I just wanted to focus for a short moment on discrimination. And when back in the early 90s, when it was clarified and recognised that there was a strain of, and there are quite a few strains of Hep C, but there were a couple of genotypes primarily. The media, I don't know whether in Mildura it happened in the same way, but I was living in Victoria, in Melbourne at the time, and it was terrifying because I remember one specific story of a footballer who was Hep C positive, and he was, it was just horrific what they did to him, front page about people living with hepatitis C. So like I keep reverting to the the idea and the promotion of services that don't harm people, that actually assist people in positive and proactive ways, because that media response to people living with Hep C has dissipated enormously, but there's still underpinning fear for a lot of people, I think, about far less so. But in those early days, I was talking with friends, with partners, like I was very proactive about education, but there was still that high level of fear. So once again, jump back to mid-2000s, and I hope this isn't too confusing jumping back and forth. It's all relevant in the scheme of things. But yes, so I tried to access treatment at RPA, and I had seen a hepatologist a couple of times, and then they told me once again what the doctor was talking about before in terms of interferon ribavirin, that I was not a suitable candidate because I had often thought of suiciding and was living with acute and chronic bipolar that at that time was not medicated. And they would not allow me because there was an enormous chance that would up the ante and I would self-harm or actually kill myself. So I was very shitty, excuse my language, and somewhat enraged that I wasn't going to have this opportunity and to attempt treatment. And the reality is I was really blessed that I didn't have that opportunity, because I saw so many suffer, and I never went through that. And I think the people who did choose or did desperately need to, that were in the very late stages of, or the middle stages of the destruction of their liver by hepatitis C, I think they're amazing that they went through that treatment, and several times, quite often, and there were liver transplants and all that. I was never impacted by Hep C like that, touch wood. And so I was still in a very bad state, very messy, still using drugs a lot, and which also had its own impacts in terms of my accessing services. And I moved to a small country town in Victoria, which is another story that I won't share with you. But and I was very, very lucky that a chemist in a town about 30 kilometres from me, there was a very proactive, very sophisticated doctor from Melbourne who was really on board with supplying opiate replacement medication. So I was able to access that. I was able to finally get on to some appropriate medication for bipolar, and I was able to move forward until I got to 2016 and was able to access the quite miraculous drugs that no matter what your political perspectives, the government at the time brought into being able to be available for virtually, well, for very low costs. And I remember celebrating that government and just being amazed by that initiative. Once again, Australia has been very progressive in terms of needle and syringe programs, in terms of harm reduction, and now with hepatitis C. And they're, addressing Hep B as well, through amazing organisations like Liverwell. So I went through treatment, and just to give you an indication, I was working full time, about 2 hours away, And I remember about a week after commencing treatment, I went in, and some of my workmates who had no idea of my background, some did because I've worked as a peer-based educator for a lot of my life, but the people who didn't, and I remember walking in and they said, "What have you done, Jules?" And I was like, what do you mean? They said, "You look really different." It still makes me want to tear up because it was the physical demonstration of my body healing and my clearing the virus. And I remember, I think I went in to the loos at work and was just staring at myself in the mirror. I couldn't see that much of a difference, but I gradually, after staring for a while, I thought, I've got colour in my face. I'm not grey anymore. And my face was sort of pink again, like it was way before I became positive at 2021. So it had been 36 years of living with hepatitis C. As I said, I think I touched on, I cleared hepatitis B, like I just cleared it without, as you know, you can't, there's no treatment for Hep B, but I naturally cleared it, but however did not clear Hep C, obviously. So that was a huge gift to have someone say that, to actually have someone notice that you look significantly different to how you had when they'd met you at the workplace. And I had this beautiful experience of driving home from work that day, as I said, about 2 hours away to the little town I live in. And I can't describe it because I had energy and there was a clarity I could not remember actually having, except when I was a lot younger. And it was quite shocking and very emotional for me because I thought, they're working. And it's difficult to explain because it's one of those things I think that you have to experience to go from chronic exhaustion to, to having a far more powerful life force in your life. And yeah, like I said, still makes me tear up. And because it was such a gift, and I've been so incredibly lucky to be given that gift, and I could not do any more than what I'm doing now, or talking with people to promote getting on a program, getting access, well, seeing relevant service providers such as doctors and getting on treatment. I was incredibly lucky. Once again, I've got a very proactive, very progressive doctor. So I was able to go down to Melbourne very quickly, get on to be prescribed the meds, come back to my small country town and work with my doctor to live through the treatment, which I didn't know whether it was going to be difficult or not, even though I was told it wasn't. So within 3 months, my doctor was very generous and he did the initial test to see whether I'd cleared it after a month, which I'm not going to mention his name because that might get him into trouble, just with cost factors with, you know, PBS. But he did it, and I was sitting in his office and he said, "You're clear, Jules, you're clear." And I want everyone to have that opportunity. And we're so lucky in Australia when people, if they're given the opportunity, can clear the virus reasonably quickly. And and without side effects. I had no side effects. I was initially the first couple of days I was really tired. But as I said, after that, my workmates were commenting on my colouring, and I had that extraordinary experience of recognising I had energy again. It so impacts your life living without that energy. It's not until you're treated successfully that you can see the impact of that, including upon your mental health. It's just exhausting, and I would say it's one of the biggest components of living with Hep C is the psychological damage of Hep C related depression. And so there's all those factors. There's access to services, there's relevant service provision being available, there's active health providers in Melbourne, so you could then have scripts sent to you and scripts sent to your chemist, and the chemist could provide them. So it's a whole new world, as you all know, since the beginning of COVID. And I think in relation to to clearing the virus, it lifts so much out of your life in terms of you're living with maybe not. I've been very open about living with hepatitis C for many years, but I know a lot of people aren't, and I know a lot of people don't get that opportunity to discuss being positive because they're still afraid of the impact of sharing that. And once again, full circle, that's where NSPs, that's where organisations like the amazing Live Well and Hepatitis New South Wales, and like I said, relevant services, have changed the world and have changed the face of living with something such as Hep C. And I know there's a hell of a lot of people who also got Hep C from, operations, blood products being contaminated. There's a lot of variables there. But once again, full circle, come back to the fact that how lucky we are in Australia when you look at countries who have immunisation programs, which are, absolutely need to be in place, but where needles have been utilised over and over again. And the level of hepatitis C is enormous of people living in particular countries. And there's no way they can access treatment unless they've got significant money. So in those particular countries I'm referring to, there's not a possibility. So what I would say as sort of, sorry if I've waffled on, is promotion of the miracle of the meds that are available now, I think is really important. Being able to give relevant information is really important. And as one of the previous doctors was saying, the whole counselling process is also really important. And that's pre-treatment and post-treatment and during treatment. And having your peers, being able to share that with your peers and promote it if you are blessed enough to clear the virus, to letting people know that this is what's available. So services promoting it, I think, are very important. Obviously, empathy, understanding, and availability of referrals and resources are paramount too. And yeah, I'm very, very lucky, and that's why I'm very, very, sorry, I have to use the same word, lucky not only to have cleared the virus, but to be given an opportunity to share about how extraordinary it is when you clear the virus. And yeah, at 62, I'm in a far better space for a whole lot of reasons, but having cleared Hep C is one of those just extraordinary.